Good evening. What you are about to hear is based on a disturbing true story from a remote, fog-covered village in rural Japan. It begins on a deserted road, late at night, with a single, flickering streetlight. Beneath it, a small child stands alone, crying. But this is not a rescue story. The locals who found the traveler's abandoned car days later knew the terrifying truth about what that child really was. Subscribe and stay with us as we uncover the chilling events that followed. You won't want to watch this alone. Our story begins in Gifu Prefecture, 2 hours north of Nagoya, a village where time seems frozen. Narrow mountain roads twist through rice fields and cedar forests so dense that sunlight barely touches the ground. The region is a knot of ancient mountains, deep valleys carved by rivers that run cold and fast, even in the height of summer. Here, tradition is not a memory. It is the heavy, damp air that settles in the lowlands each night. Most of the residents here are elderly. The young have long moved away, trading the oppressive quiet and the burden of history for the anonymity and electric pulse of the cities. They leave behind villages that are slowly being reclaimed by the wilderness. Wooden houses, with their gracefully curved tile roofs, sag under the weight of moss and neglect. In the afternoons, the only sound is the occasional shishi odoshi, the rhythmic crack of a bamboo fountain designed to scare deer. A hollow echo in a place where there is little else to listen to. This is a land of forgotten shrines and roads that lead to nowhere. The scary silent, as locals in the more populated towns call it, is not merely an absence of noise. It is a presence. It is the weight of the trees watching, the pressure of the fog that smothers sound, and the feeling that the mountains themselves are holding their breath, waiting. Among the few outsiders who regularly pass through this landscape was a 34-year-old photographer named Satoshi. He was an ordinary man in every single sense, average in height and build, with a face that was easily forgotten. This anonymity suited him. Satoshi liked the solitude of his job, endless roads, quiet nights, and no one to bother him. He was not unfriendly, but he preferred the simple, observational nature of his work. A photo, a polite nod, and he was gone. His normal, relatable environment was the cabin of his rented blue sedan. It was his castle, his bubble against the world. The dashboard was cluttered with empty coffee cans, toll receipts, and a small faded omamori charm from the East Grand Shrine that his mother had given him years ago. His simple, singular purpose was his art. He worked the late hours, a project to cover the most remote and forgotten places in the prefecture, the ones the daytime drivers avoided. He didn't mind. The photos were better, and the roads were empty. Tonight, like any other Tuesday, was a long haul. He had a shot list of 36 locations, most of them old shrines for the shut-ins and elderly who populated the mountain villages. His final location, scheduled for just after 1 a.m., was in one of the smallest, most isolated hamlets in the Gifu Highlands, a place his GPS barely recognized, marked only by a cluster of traditional Kaminka houses. The highway faded behind him, the broad, well-lit artery of modern Japan narrowing into a dark, 2-lane county road. Satoshi took a sip of lukewarm canned coffee, the bitter liquid doing little to cut through his fatigue. For the past hour, the radio had been dissolving into static, the upbeat J-pop playlist he used to stay awake now just a hiss and crackle. He finally turned it off. The sudden silence in the cab was immediate and heavy, broken only by the diesel engine's hum and the crunch of tyres on the poorly maintained asphalt. This was the part of the route he disliked. The road, barely wide enough for his car, plunged into the cedar forest. The ancient trees formed a dense canopy, blocking out the moon and stars, creating a tunnel of absolute blackness that was only broken by his high beams. The beams themselves seemed to struggle, illuminating nothing but the next few meters of fog-slicked road and the endless uniform trunks of the trees that crowded the shoulder. His GPS chimed. its synthesized voice sounding unnervingly loud in the quiet cab. "In 500 meters, turn left." Satoshi slowed the car. The turn was little more than a gravel track, a gap in the trees he would have missed if he hadn't been looking for it. A moss-covered stone marker, carved with a character he couldn't read, stood at the entrance like a decayed tooth. He made the tight turn, the car's chassis groaning as the wheels dropped onto the uneven, muddy ground. He was now truly in the silent village, or at least, what little remained of it. The documentary-style narration of his life would note that this was where the air pressure changed. He passed half-collapsed sheds and long, overgrown rice paddies, their water black and still under the fog. The houses, set far back from the track, were deep shadows against the slightly less dark mountain. Not a single light was on. No porch lamps, no blue-white glow of a television screen, not even the red pinpoint of a security system. "You have arrived at your destination," the GPS announced cheerfully. Satoshi pulled to a stop. He killed the engine. The resulting silence was absolute. It was so profound that it made his ears ring. He couldn't hear crickets, or the wind in the trees, or the distant sound of the river he had followed for miles. There was nothing, just a thick, pressurized void. This was the mundane, everyday fear of his art, not of ghosts, but of the dark, of strange dogs, of slipping on a dark porch. This could happen to me. This could happen to anyone working late, anyone whose job forced them into unfamiliar territory after midnight. "Just shoot it and go," he muttered, checking the lens on his old camera. It was a heavy camera bag, surprisingly cold. The location's name was Kikuchi. The address was just the house number. He grabbed his flashlight and his tripod, stepping out of the car. The cold night air hit him instantly, sharp and smelling of damp earth and something else. Something faintly metallic and sweet, like old incense. He shined his light on the house. It was the largest one, set back at the end of the track. A traditional farmhouse with a heavy thatched roof that seemed to sag in the middle. The shoji paper screens were dark and blank. He walked up the stone path, his footsteps sounding impossibly loud, like rocks being cracked together. Each step felt like an intrusion. He could feel the eyes of the other dark houses on him. The silence was no longer empty. It was watchful. He reached the wooden porch, the engawa, and stepped up, the boards creaking under his weight. He shined his light at the door, looking for a bell. There wasn't one. Just a dark, heavy wooden door and a small, worn nameplate that confirmed the name, Kikuchi. He raised his hand to knock. He was just a photographer, a normal man with a simple purpose, standing in a normal, relatable, if remote, environment. He was tired. He was annoyed by the quiet, and he just wanted to go home. He knocked twice, the sound deadened by the heavy wood, as if the house simply absorbed it. He waited. There was nothing. From deep inside the pitch-black house, he heard a single, slow sound, the scraping of a chair being dragged across a wooden floor. The studio was a memory of fluorescent light and chemical fumes. Now, there was only the narrow beam of the car's headlights cutting through the encroaching dusk. Satoshi's day had ended an hour ago, but this last location, marked ZG, in a spidery old-fashioned script, had been added to his list at the last minute. The address was barely on his digital map. A terminal point where the paved road crumbled into gravel and then, finally, dirt. It was late autumn, and the small clock on his dashboard glowed 7:03 p.m. The woods on either side of the track were dense and dark, the trees leaning in as if to swallow the weak light. He finally pulled up to the destination, a small, dilapidated farmhouse set back at the very edge of the woods. The small shrine at the end of the drive was a newer model plastic, stark white and spotlessly clean, completely at odds with the peeling paint and sagging porch of the house it served. Satoshi sighed, rubbing his eyes. Maybe they just replaced it. Old people are particular about their gods. He was too tired to question the logistics. All he wanted was a good shot so he could go home. The house itself was a void. Not a single light shone from within. No porch light, no warm glow from a television or a kitchen lamp. It sat in the deepening shadows, utterly still. He grabbed his small, heavy camera bag and his tripod, stepping out of the car. The gravel crunched loudly under his boots. The air was cold, very sharp with the smell of pine and damp earth. He walked up the rickety wooden steps and knocked. The sound was flat, absorbed instantly by the heavy wood. He waited. He was about to knock again, harder, when the door creaked open. An old woman stood in the gap. She smiled, a kind, wrinkled expression, but her eyes, pale and cloudy, didn't seem to focus on him. They looked just past his left shoulder, toward the dark woods he'd just driven through. "You're late," she said, her voice a dry rustle. "My apologies, madam," Satoshi said, bowing automatically. The road was long. He held out his camera and a small gift. She's just old, he thought. Her eyesight is probably failing. She took the gift, but ignored the camera. Her hand, when it brushed his, was shockingly cold. Not the warm, papery skin of the elderly, but a damp, cellar-like cold that made him instinctively flinch. She just continued to smile, her pale gaze fixed on the darkness behind him. "No photos are needed. Camera-san," she whispered. And before he could protest, she closed the door. The click of the deadbolt locking was distinct and loud in the quiet. Satoshi stood on the porch for a moment, the cold spot on his hand tingling. He shook his head, turned, and walked briskly back to his car. He got in, shoved the key in the ignition, and paused. The soundscape was wrong. In the absence of his rumbling old engine, there should have been the normal sounds of the country. Crickets, the rustle of night animals, the wind. There was nothing. An absolute pressing, vacuum-like silence. "It's just quiet out here," he reasoned, his hand tightening on the key. "I'm just not used to it." But this wasn't peace. It was an absence. The air felt thick, heavy, as if it were holding its breath. He was about to turn the key, to shatter the oppressive quiet, when he heard it. It was faint, soft, almost like a sigh. "Help!" Satoshi froze. His entire body went totally rigid. The voice was thin, reedy. It hadn't come from the house. It had come from the woods. The wind, he thought instantly, a cold sweat breaking on his neck. Just the wind. But there was no wind. Not a single leaf on the trees nearest the car was moving. The silence had returned, heavier this time, as if waiting. He sat, unmoving, for a full 30 seconds. He was just starting to convince himself it was fatigue when the voice came again. This time, it was undeniable. "Help me. Please, help me." It was a child's voice, or a woman's, desperate, and coming from the pitch-black tree line. All rationalization evaporated, replaced by a jolt of adrenaline. A lost child, in this cold. They wouldn't last the night. The voice was clear, yet it had no echo. It seemed to hang in the air right next to his window, while simultaneously coming from deep within the trees. He couldn't just drive away. He yanked the keys from the ignition, grabbed his high-powered flashlight from the glove compartment, and threw open the car door. He slammed the door shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot, and the darkness and silence crashed back in. He clicked on the flashlight. The powerful white beam cut a clean cone into the black. "Hello?" he called out. "I'm coming. Keep talking." His light swept the tree line. It caught something, just inside the first layer of trees. Tied to a low-hanging pine branch was a small, red ribbon. A trail marker, he thought. A wave of relief washing over him. She's leaving a trail. Smart kid. He moved quickly toward it. The ribbon was perfectly clean. It wasn't faded or frayed at all, despite the damp, misty air. The ribbon itself was perfectly, impossibly dry. He pushed past the branch, the ribbon brushing his cheek. It felt like silk. The second he stepped under the canopy, the temperature dropped. The sounds of his own boots on the thick carpet of pine needles were muffled. He swept the light ahead. 20 feet deeper in, hanging from another branch, was a second red ribbon. "Hello," he called again. His voice sounded thin. There was no reply. Only the next ribbon. Waiting. He started walking. The forest swallowed him whole. Branches scraped his jacket. His flashlight beam cut through mist and leaves, illuminating a world of damp, dark trunks and skeletal fingers of wood. "Hello, where are you?" Satoshi called out, his voice sounding thin and weak against the oppressive silence. "I'm here," the voice answered, distant but close enough to make his chest tighten. After several minutes of pushing through wet ferns and over slick roots, Satoshi reached a small clearing and saw him, a boy, maybe 6 years old, standing motionless with his back turned, white shirt, black shorts, bare legs pale in this cold night air. A wave of relief, sharp and sudden, washed over Satoshi. It was just a lost kid. "Hey," he said, trying to keep his voice gentle. "Are you okay? Are you lost?" The boy didn't move. The air in the clearing was dead, unmoving. The mist pulled around the child's ankles like a shroud. "Kid, we need to go. It's not safe out here." Satoshi took a step forward. The boy turned around, but not in the way a person turns. It was a slow, fluid pivot, as if he were a statue rotating on a base. His flashlight beam found the child's face, and Satoshi's breath hitched. The boy's skin was the color of bleached bone, wet and shiny in the humidity. His eyes were wide, perfectly round, and reflected the flashlight's beam with a flat, milky sheen. There was no fear in them, no recognition, nothing. He just stared. Satoshi's relief evaporated, replaced by a cold, crawling dread. What's your name?" The boy's mouth opened. A sound emerged. A wet, airy sigh that sounded like the word "here," but stretched thin, like old tape. Then, slowly, the boy raised a pale arm and pointed, not back toward the path Satoshi had come from, but deeper, into a part of the forest that looked impenetrable, a solid wall of black. "No," Satoshi said, taking an involuntary step back. "We're not going that way. We're going back to the road." The boy's expression didn't change, but he began to walk. He didn't push branches aside. He seemed to glide between them. With a final, sickening look over his shoulder, he slipped into the darkness and was gone. "Wait! Stop!" Satoshi yelled. Driven by a panicked, confused instinct, Wushao, he plunged after him. This was the visual tension he'd only seen in films. The world dissolved into a blur of close-ups, his own hand gripping the flashlight, the silver bark of a tree flashing past, the mud sucking at his boots. The forest was no longer just a place, it was a participant. The air grew colder. He could hear his own frantic breathing, loud and ragged, and another sound, a faint, rhythmic thump, 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 like a heavy, waterlogged object being beaten against a tree, far away. He burst into a second clearing, identical to the first. He spun around, his light cutting frantic arcs. "Where are you?" "Here." The voice came from behind him. He whipped around. The boy was standing 10 feet away, by the base of a gnarled, ancient tree. He was doing something with his hands. Satoshi lowered his beam. The boy was stacking small, flat stones, one on top of the other, a child's game. "Stop doing that," Satoshi pleaded, his voice shaking. "Please, let's just go." The boy paused his work. He looked up, his head tilting at an unnatural angle, like a bird's. A smile spread across his face, slow and mechanical. It was wrong. It was too wide for his small features, pulling the pale skin taut over his cheekbones. It was a smile of pure, vacant mimicry. A loud crack like a gunshot echoed from the trees to his left. Satoshi flinched, shining his light toward the sound. He saw nothing but endless, dripping branches. When he looked back, the boy was gone. The small can of stones lay scattered on the ground. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He was lost, utterly lost. The trees looked the same in every direction. The path he had followed was gone, reclaimed by the woods. "Help me!" he screamed, his voice cracking, raw and thin in the air. "Help me!" Only the forest answered. The thump, thump, thump was closer now. He ran. He chose a direction at random and scrambled over roots. His arms held up to protect his face. The beam of his flashlight bounced wildly, creating a dizzying, hand-held nightmare. The mist was so thick now he could barely see 10 feet. He stumbled, catching himself on a tree trunk slick with moss. He gasped, resting, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Here!" The whisper was in his ear. He recoiled, crying out, and fell backward into the mud. He crab-walked away, shining his light. There was nothing there, just the fog. But the air where he had been standing remained unnaturally cold. A perfect, man-sized column of ice in the humid night. He got to his feet and ran again. He didn't know for how long. It felt like hours. The strange events were repeating, looping, each one a little worse, a little more impossible. The voice, the disappearance, the smile. He finally saw a break in the trees, a faint, diffuse glow. The road. He sprinted, bursting through the tree line and tumbling onto the wet asphalt, gravel stinging his palms. The car was as he'd left it, door ajar. He scrambled in, pulling himself up. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he panted, seeing his reflection. "I was gone for 5 minutes, tops. It felt like an hour." Satoshi stared at the clock, hyperventilating. Five minutes, he choked out. "No, I was in there for an hour. At least. What am I talking about?" His own face was a mask of confusion. "I was at the trailhead. I went in. I yelled hello twice, and then I came running out. The boy. Oh God, there was a boy." Satoshi gripped the steering wheel. "A little kid. White shirt, black shorts. He's still in there. He's pale. And his eyes." Satoshi put his hands on his own head, his expression shifting from confusion to terror. "Satoshi, stop. There was no boy. I've been right here. No one else is out here. You're just spooked." "I'm not lying," Satoshi shouted, his voice cracking. "I saw him. He was stacking stones. He smiled at me." "You saw a tree stump in the fog. Man," he said, slamming the driver's side door. "You're letting those urban legends get to you. This place is famous for it. You wanted tension. You got it. Now start the car. You're scaring me." Defeated. Satoshi slumped in the seat. He felt insane. This was rational. This was sane. But what Satoshi had seen was real. No one would believe him. He started the engine, and the car pulled away, its red taillights painting the wet road. Satoshi stared out the side window, watching the wall of dark trees slide by. His reflection stared back at him, pale and wild-eyed. He glanced at the side view mirror. Reflected in the small rectangle of glass, shrinking with distance, was the opening to the forest path. And standing at its edge, motionless, was the boy. He was watching the car leave. As Satoshi watched, frozen, the boy's head tilted, the too-wide, mechanical smile spread across his face. Slowly, he raised one pale hand, and he waved. Satoshi let out a strangled gasp and spun around. Looking out the back window, the road was empty. There was nothing but darkness. "What now?" Satoshi snapped, his eyes on the road. Satoshi turned back, his entire body trembling. Nothing. Just a shadow. He looked down at his feet. The car's heater was blasting, but he was freezing cold. On the black rubber floor mat, illuminated by the faint glow of the dashboard, was a small, perfect, child-sized footprint, still wet with black, oily mud. The fog was a shroud, muffling the world. It clung to Satoshi, cold and wet, deadening the sound of his own desperate footsteps. The alley was a tight, oppressive canyon of brick and rusted metal. He shouldn't have come this way. He knew it. A primal instinct had screamed at him to stay on the lit streets. But the shortcut was too tempting. Now, he was paying the price, and he was not alone. It was just a shape at first, huddled against the far wall where the alley dead-ended. A small shape, like a child curled up, hiding from the cold. Satoshi's heart hammered against his ribs. A frantic bird in a cage. Every urban legend he'd ever heard coiled in his stomach. He raised his flashlight. The beam cut a weak, nervous cone through the mist. "Hey," his voice cracked, too loud in the suffocating silence. "Hey, are you okay?" The figure didn't move. It didn't even shiver. The temperature in the alley plummeted. Satoshi could see his own breath plume, a white cloud of panic. But from the small, huddled form, nothing. No breath. No life. I'm going to call for help. Okay?" Satoshi fumbled for his phone, his fingers numb, slick with a cold sweat. Then, slowly, the child turned around. It wasn't a human turn. There was no rustle of fabric, no shuffle of feet. It was a single fluid motion, accompanied by the faint, wet pop of vertebrae seating themselves. The flashlight beam found the face. Satoshi's breath hitched, frozen in his lungs. The face was bone white, not pale. It was the color of bleached, polished porcelain, glistening with a damp, oily sheen. And the eyes, his mind couldn't process them. They were completely black, no pupils, no whites, just two empty, endless voids staring back at him. They were pits. They were abysses that drank his flashlight beam, swallowing the light whole. He felt a sickening, pulling sensation, as if his very soul was being drawn out through his own eyes. And then it smiled. The smile was the single most horrific thing Satoshi had ever witnessed. It was not an expression of joy, or humor, or anything human. It was an act of anatomical violence. The lips, thin and cracked, peeled back and back and back, far past the point of possibility. The skin at the corners of the mouth tore, splitting open with a sound like wet cloth ripping. The smile stretched from ear to ear, a gaping, cavernous crescent filled with teeth. Not human teeth, but a jagged, interlocking row of stained, needle-like fangs. Too wide, too wrong. A voice slithered from that impossible maw. It wasn't one voice, it was a chorus, a layered, dissonant harmony of a child's giggle, a woman's sob, and a low, guttural growl. They all spoke as one, echoing not in the alley, but directly inside Satoshi's skull. "Come play with me." Satoshi ran. He didn't make a decision. His hindbrain took over. He dropped his phone. It clattered, useless, on the damp pavement. He spun, his boots sliding on the slick grime, and he fled. He didn't look back. He couldn't. To look back was to die. His lungs burned. His heart felt like it would explode. The sound of his own ragged breathing and the frantic slap, slap, slap of his feet were the only sounds in the world. He burst out of the alley onto the street. He looked left, empty. Looked right, empty. The fog had consumed the entire city. No cars, no people, no escape. He sprinted down the middle of the road, gasping. He heard a sound. It wasn't footsteps. It was a click-clack, click-clack. He risked a glance over his shoulder. The alley he had just fled was empty. There was nothing there. A wave of dizzying, disbelieving relief washed over him. Had he imagined it? Was it a hallucination? Click, clack. The sound was in front of him. He froze. At the far end of the street, barely visible through the swirling mist, a figure stood under a flickering, dying streetlight. It was the boy. It hadn't run. It hadn't chased him. It had simply arrived. It was waiting for him. The head was tilted at an impossible, broken angle, resting on its own shoulder. And even from this distance, Satoshi could see the smile. It glowed faintly, a sickly white gash in the darkness. No. Satoshi whimpered. He turned, diving into another side street, a maze of residential walls. He was sobbing now, hot tears mixing with the cold mist on his face. He was lost. This wasn't his neighborhood. The world had reshaped itself into a labyrinth for him. He heard a sound above. He looked up. The creature was on the side of the building, moving like a broken-backed spider, its limbs bent the wrong way, its spine contorting. It scuttled along the brickwork, its black void eyes locked onto him. The click-clack was the sound of its dislocated joints finding purchase. It giggled, that awful, layered sound. It dropped. It landed on the ground 20 feet in front of him with a wet, heavy thud, landing in a crouch that no human body could survive. Satoshi screamed, a raw, wordless shriek, and scrambled backward. He fell, his hands scraping open on the gravel. He kicked. He crab-walked away as the thing rose. It rose wrong. It unspooled, its back straightening with a series of sickening, wet snaps. It took a step, click, another step, clack. "We just want to play," it hissed, the voices churning. Satoshi got to his feet. He ran. He was blind with panic. He didn't see the chain-link fence until he collided with it. The metal rattled. A gunshot in the silence. A dead end. He was trapped. He spun around, pressing his back against the cold, unyielding metal. He raised his shaking flashlight, the one he hadn't even realized he was still clutching. The beam found it. It was 10 feet away, standing perfectly still. It tilted its head to the other side. Crack. "You're it," the voices whispered. It didn't lunge. It didn't run. It slid forward, as if pulled by an unseen string, its feet never moving. It covered the distance in a single, terrifying second. The flashlight illuminated the face one last time, the oily porcelain skin, the cavernous black holes of its eyes, the smile, stretching so wide it was unhinging its own jaw. The light went out. Satoshi didn't run from the forest. He retreated. It was a slow, agonizing walk backward, his eyes fixed on the spot where the child had been, his hand clamped over his mouth to stifle his own ragged breathing. He hadn't stopped walking until the asphalt of the highway was solid beneath his boots, and the sound of a passing truck horn broke the trance. He found the first lighted sign he could, a small, smoky izakaya on the edge of the town he was supposed to be documenting. The air inside was thick with cigarette smoke and the savoury smell of grilled skewers. It was an anchor. He sat at the cypress wood counter, staring into a beer he hadn't touched. The foam had long since dissolved. His camera bag sat at his feet, feeling impossibly heavy, as if it had soaked up the dread from the woods. How to capture that? The thought was absurd. His hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from a deep, cellular vibration. He was a photographer of abandoned places, a chronicler of decay. He had never been part of the abandonment before. "You look like you've seen a ghost, son." The voice was gravelly, low. Satoshi flinched, turning to the man beside him. He was older, perhaps in his late 70s, with a face like a dried persimmon, deeply wrinkled and weathered, but with eyes that were startlingly clear. He was nursing a small cup of atsukan, hot sake. Satoshi tried to laugh it off, but what came out was a dry cough. "Something like that. The forest up on Route 14? The old man asked, not looking at him, just swirling his sake cup. "You have the look of a man who went where he shouldn't." Satoshi's blood chilled. How did you know?" The old man took a slow sip. "This town lives in the shadow of that mountain. We see people go up. We don't always see them come down. But when they do," he finally turned his gaze on Satoshi, "they have that look, The look of the kamikakushi, those spirited away, who managed to find the path back. It felt like a dam breaking. The professional skepticism, the urban confidence, it all washed away. Satoshi found himself confessing, the words tumbling out in a low, desperate whisper. He described the overgrown path, the feeling of being watched, the sudden, impossible sound of a child's laughter. And then I saw him, a little boy. He wasn't right. He was pale. His clothes were wrong. He just stared. He asked me to help. He expected the old man to laugh, to call him a drunk or a fool. Instead, the man's expression turned impossibly grave. He set his cup down with a quiet click. Ah! The old man breathed out, the sound heavy with sorrow. So, you saw it. Saw what? It was a prank, right? An illusion, Satoshi pleaded. You saw a Kodomo no Rei, the man said softly, the name itself seeming to chill the air around them. A child's spirit. He motioned to the bar owner for another sake, his eyes distant, lost in a memory that wasn't his own. This is not a story for tourists. You understand? This is a sadness, a deep stain on the land. He explained, in the rural, impoverished parts of Japan, decades ago, winters were cruel. Famine was a frequent visitor. Sometimes, the man said, his voice dropping to a whisper, when there was no food, and a family had too many mouths, impossible choices were made. It is a time we do not like to remember. Mabiki. The word hung in the air, thinning the seedlings. Infanticide. Other times, he continued, children just got lost. They would wander into the forest looking for wild vegetables or playing hide and seek, and the forest, it would not let them go. They would die alone, cold, calling for a mother who could no longer hear them. Satoshi felt the beer rise in his throat, the little boy's voice. That here, they do not rest, the old man said, his gaze fixed on the wood grain of the counter. They are spirits of profound loneliness. They remain where they took their last breath. Forever children, forever lost. They crave warmth. They crave company. He turned to Satoshi, his clear eyes pinning him. They see someone like you, a traveler, someone kind-looking, and they call out for help. They lead you deeper, step by step, asking you to play, or to help them find their way home. They are not malicious, not in the way a demon is. They are just empty. They want you to stay with them forever. They lead people into the forest, Satoshi clarified, his voice barely audible. Until they never return, the old man finished. They become lost, just as the spirit is. Their bodies are found weeks later, miles from any path, or they are never found at all. The forest reclaims them. The izakaya, moments before a refuge, now felt like a cage. The smoke in the air was suffocating. The old man's words were the consequence. They were the nail in the coffin of Satoshi's reality. This wasn't a story. It was a diagnosis. He hadn't just seen something. He had interacted with a hook. And the only reason he wasn't dangling from it was some blind, primal instinct that forced him to retreat instead of advance. He looked at his camera bag, the project, the exhibition, the beauty of decay. It all seemed like a grotesque joke. He had been a voyeur of tragedy, and the tragedy had finally looked back. He threw a few thousand-yen notes onto the counter, far more than his beer cost. "Thank you," he stammered, his chair scraping loudly on the floor. "Be careful, young man," the old man called to his back. "Just because you left the forest, it does not mean the forest has left you." Satoshi fled. He didn't just leave the izakaya. He abandoned the town. He sprinted back to his rented minshuku, his mind a screaming siren. He ripped his equipment from the wall sockets, stuffing chargers, lenses, and clothes into his bags with frantic, clumsy movements. He didn't care about being neat. He cared about distance. He was in his car in under 10 minutes, the engine roaring to life in the sleeping village. He sped onto the highway, not even checking the GPS, just driving toward the glow of the nearest major city, away from the mountain that now loomed in his rearview mirror like a crouching beast. He drove for hours, the adrenaline turning sour in his stomach. The mental scars were already forming. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw him, the pale face, the dark, flat hair. He heard the whisper, "Help me." The physical scars were minor, but they were there. Deep scratches lined his arms and the backs of his hands from the branches he'd pushed through in his hasty retreat. A throbbing ache had settled behind his right eye. But the true wound was invisible. It was the absolute crushing certainty that the world he thought he knew was a thin veneer over something ancient and hungry. He finally pulled over at a brightly lit, sterile service station 2 prefectures away, the sun just beginning to taint the eastern sky. He stumbled into the bathroom and splashed cold water on his face, staring at his reflection. The man looking back was a fraud. His face was ashen, his eyes wide and haunted. He had the look the old man described, the look of someone who had peered over the edge. He had survived, barely. He was alive. He was safe. He was hundreds of kilometers away. But as he looked at his camera, sitting innocently on the passenger seat, he knew he would never be able to lift it again without feeling the cold. Small hand of the forest reaching for his. He had escaped. But he had not escaped unchanged. He had left his professional detachment, his courage, and his sense of safety back on that overgrown, forgotten path. And he knew, with a certainty that settled in his bones, he would never, ever go back for 7 days. Satoshi tried to process the event in the Gifu highlands. He developed the film, but the resulting images were a mockery of his fear. There was only the path, empty, dappled in green light, devoid of any small figure, any vacant smile, any milky white eyes. The silence he had felt, the oppressive weight of the air, the sudden unnatural chill, none of it could be captured by his lens. He was a photographer whose primary tool had failed to validate his reality. He told himself it was a hallucination, a trick of the light, like in Aokigahara or the forest's reputation. He was stressed, he was overworked. He began, slowly, to believe his own rationalizations. Then, on the 8th day, his supervisor called. Miss Fuji was a pragmatic woman in her late 60s, her voice usually a clipped, no-nonsense monotone. Today, it was hesitant, laced with a discomfort that immediately put Satoshi on edge. "Satoshi-san," she began, the formality a clear sign of trouble. "I received a strange follow-up call regarding your shoot last week from the elderly woman at the farmhouse, the one who gave you directions." Satoshi's grip tightened on his phone. "Is everything all right? Did I disturb her?" "No, not you. She called to report something she heard after you left her property. She said you were barely out of sight. Your car just a glint on the main road. When she heard it, a cold, familiar dread began to pool in Satoshi's stomach. "Heard what? Fuji-san?" There was a pause, the static on the line seeming to roar in the silence. "A child, crying, deep in the woods, from the direction you had just gone. She said it was the most heartbreaking sound. She called the local police, but they found nothing. She wanted to make sure you were all right." Satoshi's blood did not just run cold, it felt as if it had turned to ice, freezing his veins from the inside out. The question was a hammer blow to his carefully constructed denial. It wasn't what the woman had heard. It was when she had heard it. He had been there. He had seen the boy. But he had heard nothing, no crying, no sobbing, only a profound, unnatural silence. The woman had heard the crying after he was gone. The implications of that simple timeline shift were monstrous. The crying wasn't a call for help, it was a lure. And when he, the prey, had escaped. The lure had simply been reset for the next passerby. The story was not over. His encounter was not an ending. It was a failed beginning. He couldn't sleep. The documentary realism of Ms. Fuji's voice, the second-hand account of the crying, shattered his fragile peace. The forest was no longer a place of passive sorrow. It was a hunting ground, driven by a new, colder fear. Satoshi returned to the region, not with his camera, but with a notepad. He bypassed the tourist centers and went straight to the small, beige municipal building that housed the town's archives. The air inside was dry and smelled of dust and aging paper. He started with a broad search. Missing persons, unsolved cases, accidental deaths within a 20-kilometer radius of the forest, going back 50 years. The clerk, a weary man who didn't look up from his newspaper, pointed him toward a row of grey filing cabinets and a dated microfiche reader in the corner. This was not a sensationalized documentary. This was the slow, bureaucratic ledger of human loss. The first reports were predictable. A hiker in 1983, succumbing to exposure. A tourist in 1991. Car found abandoned. Case ruled a probable suicide. But as Satoshi dug deeper, moving from the official, sanitized reports to the older, handwritten ledgers from the 1970s and 60s, a different narrative emerged. The sterile language of the reports disappeared. Last seen, presumed deceased, could not hide the pattern. It wasn't just despondent adults. Yui Sano, 8, 1978, disappeared during a family picnic near the forest's edge. Katsuro Honda, 12, 1972, vanished while looking for beetles. His bicycle was found on the path. 2 university students, 1985. Backpacks and tent found. No sign of them. A family of 3, 1996. Their car was left running on the side of the road. The suicide forest label was a convenient, modern misdirection. It was a misdirection. It provided an easy answer for the steady, quiet stream of disappearances that predated the term by decades. These were not all suicides. These were people who were taken. He spent 2 days scrolling through crackling microfiche, his eyes burning. He cross-referenced the locations, the picnic area, the roadside, the hiking trail. He plotted them on a map. They all formed a terrifying constellation, a tight cluster of loss, centered on the exact grove of cedar trees he had photographed, the spot where he had seen the boy. This was the true backstory. Not a single, tragic ghost, but a chronic, hungry void that had been swallowing people for generations. The archives were the documentation of its feeding cycle. His hands were shaking as he sat in his small motel room, the laptop's glow casting harsh shadows on the wall. The paper archives had given him the what. He needed the why. He turned to the digital archives, the forums, the blogs, the dark corners of the internet dedicated to Japan's urban legends. He typed in the name of the local area. Child. Milky eyes. He waded through pages of generic ghost stories and creepypasta. It was meaningless noise. Until he found it. A post on a long-defunct paranormal forum. The last activity was from 2007. The thread was titled, "It's Still There, the Smiling Boy Near Gifu." The post was written in a frantic, disjointed style, a digital scream for help from someone who knew they wouldn't be believed. Satoshi read it, and the ice in his veins began to fracture. I'm not crazy. My friend, Yuki, and I were there 2 weeks ago. We weren't there for, we were just exploring. We took a small path off the main trail. It got quiet. So quiet, like the air was dead. That's when we saw him. A little boy, maybe 5 or 6, standing by a big tree. He was just staring. Yuki called out, "Hey, are you lost?" The boy didn't answer and he just smiled. It wasn't a real smile. It was too wide. It looked like it hurt his face. And his eyes, I swear to God, his eyes were wrong. They were pale, all pale, like milk glass. No colour, No pupil, just white. Yuki started walking toward him, telling him it was okay. I told him to stop. I was screaming. I don't know why, but I was terrified. Yuki didn't listen. He got about 5 feet away, and the boy's smile got wider. Yuki just stopped. He turned his head to look at me. His face was blank, empty. Then the boy raised his hand, and Yuki just walked into the woods after him. He didn't look back. I called his name until my throat was raw. I ran all the way back to the car. The police don't believe me. They think Yuki ran away or that I'm on drugs. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a ghost. It was something pretending. Satoshi slammed the laptop shut, a choked sound escaping his throat. All the clues, all the disjointed pieces of his experience, now locked into place with horrifying, perfect clarity. The unnatural silence of the forest, a predator's hush, silencing the world to isolate its prey. His first photograph of the empty path. It hadn't been empty. The entity was already there, watching, assessing him. The boy's appearance, a lure designed to trigger compassion, to draw you close. The pale eyes, not a sign of sorrow, but an absence of a soul. The impossible smile, the anticipation of the predator, the rictus of the trap about to spring, and the phone call, the final, terrible piece, the crying the old woman heard after he left. It confirmed the forum post. It was something pretending. It was a mechanism. When Yuki was taken, the hunt was over. When Satoshi had resisted, had felt the wrongness and lowered his camera, the entity had let him go. The prey was spooked, and so it simply reset the trap. The crying began, a new lure cast into the woods, waiting for the next person. The first warning had been the encounter itself, this phone call, this research. This was the second warning. He hadn't just seen a ghost. He had survived it. He was the one that got away, and he now carried the knowledge that the trap, in the deep, quiet woods, was open and waiting. So, what do you think? After hearing that, what would you do if you heard a child crying alone in the dark? Is your first instinct to help, or would a cold sense of dread tell you to flee? It's a chilling decision, and it's a fear that is deeply rooted in folklore. What you just heard taps into a terrifying belief. In Japanese folklore, spirits known as kodomo no rei, or child spirits, are not always innocent. They are said to mimic the lost and helpless, specifically to prey on the compassion of the living. They appear vulnerable. They cry for help. But their true and terrifying intent is to lead you away from safety forever. This legend comes with a strict set of survival rules, repeated for generations. If you hear that cry in the night, don't follow. If you see a small figure standing still in the dark, don't approach. And if they turn around and smile, run. What other cultural beliefs or urban legends do you know that turn innocence into terror? Let me know your thoughts and share your own local ghost stories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey into the dark, please subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the horrors we unearth next.